world is broken beyond repair. At least, that's what everyone on the internet and the news media claims. But what if it's not? What if we are exactly where some people set us out to be? Reading through the popular Substack, Letters from an American, I can't help but think that we are basically living through the aftermath of the growth of something called supply-side economics. Basically, the idea that in capitalism, while there is capital, loans and credit and so forth, and consumers, capital is much more important than people. The writer behind this Substack, Heather Cox Richardson, a historian, explains that after World War II, there was a liberal consensus. The idea that government should be useful and do things for people, protect our civil rights, regulate businesses, and put the public good first. And she doesn't say this, but I'm pretty sure that the good old times of the 50s and 60s that everyone likes to wax nostalgic about were marked with heavy taxes on the wealthy and a higher standard of living for ordinary folks. But with the rise of Ronald Reagan, there was a sense that the government was infringing on our freedoms, and policy began shifting towards helping business to grow and hollowing out government funds for us lay people to give them tax breaks. So this moment in time is really just a logical extension of that set of policies from 40 years ago. Okay, that explains the economics, but what about our endlessly selfish and plastic world? Well, I couldn't help but think, what if we applied this concept culturally? Culture is a really hard thing to see when you are in it. I know. For an anthropologist, those who study human culture, trying to show people their own culture is a bit like trying to show a fish water. It's all around us, so how do we quantify it? How do we take what is economic and make it into something we live in every day? Something that determines many of our most fundamental behaviors? Well, we're gonna try and do just that today, so stick around. If you're intrigued by this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button and commenting below. Your kind words help me keep going in this ridiculous world. I hope that you like the uncertainty that I'm attempting to bring to the table, because while everyone has a certain explanation for our current reality, this video is my attempt to understand things. Like all of us, I'm just guessing in the dark, but I'm willing to admit it. So my theory is that our world's obsession with business has created a new culture in America, possibly globally. A culture that has not only deified business, as many of those neoliberalism as religion videos and articles claim, but rather this kind of capitalist economics, one which places business over people, has made business practices into our behaviors. We are expected to operate our lives like businesses, to always be productive, and to find satisfaction in the hedonistic outcomes of it. There is no sense of spirituality or family life or anything that was valued in the past. Everything seems to be about business and productivity now. And while this does work for many people, it doesn't work for most of us. And it has left many of us deeply dissatisfied, seeking solace in extremism or the culture wars or other addictive behaviors. This misery shows up in everything, and we don't even understand why we are so deeply unhappy and angry. The world may be economically successful, business may be booming, but I can't remember a time when humans were more cheesed off globally. Now, I haven't been around very long, but I do like history. Even in the 60s, which is historically depicted as a tumultuous time, ordinary people who checked out from the rage were relatively stable and happy, as I understand it. You can comment and prove me wrong, but nowadays everyone is so subject to this business culture that we are all just full of hatred, and especially this weird hatred of wealthy people. We can't escape it, and I think it's because of the habits that we have developed in the culture of business. Beyond media, trends of globalization like immigration, even before billionaires got the kind of power that they have today, this culture developed and informed our world as we know it. It is all of our emotional needs, our relationships, our satisfaction in every way, and if it isn't, then we are the problem. We have elevated the economy as a concept into the space of a god. We worship the economy the same way our ancestors worshipped invisible deities in temples thousands of years ago. People vote and make decisions entirely on the economy, as if they will go hungry tomorrow if they don't do something now. Because we don't see the economy as something we created. It's just as innate as a god or a goddess. And the thing is, we created religion, but it was born of specific experiences that felt mystical and strange. Hallucinogenic drugs, or the wonder and awe of bathing in the ocean, being in nature, experiencing an unknowable feeling or phenomenon that we just felt the need to deify. But the economy wasn't born that way. We created it through hard work and legislation over time. It's not some mystical and unknowable thing that is out of our hands, so we must read religious texts and pray and go on spiritual journeys to understand God or spirit or whatever you believe in. We go within and we seek, but the economy isn't anything like that. Of course, reading about the economy in the news, you might think that, but ultimately, this was 100% created by us, and relatively recently. So, arguing about what Jesus may or may not have approved of is tricky, given that the Bible was written thousands of years ago. But our economic systems are determined by our government's choices, by the choices of our business leaders, and even ordinary people's choices to buy or not buy certain things. Ironically, these systems were designed to give us control, stability, and a peaceful world in which we could see progress and the improvement of human life. In changing the economy this way, we have changed ourselves and our world too, and yes, I know, someone right now is typing in the comments, but that's just capitalism. No, just like communism, capitalism is an economic system, and unfortunately, the culture determines how the economics are run. Communism in Cuba was very different from communism in Russia, and capitalism runs differently in different parts of the world. Political systems also determine how economic systems are run. So put away the hammer and the sickle, comrade. As a matter of fact, just please refrain from commenting until you've heard my full argument. So what is culture? Bear with me if I get anything wrong here, but culture is, on a basic level, a series of practices passed on over time. American culture is also really complicated because we have so many different people from so many different backgrounds coming here all of the time. And over time, people forget their cultural practices. If your family came here from Ireland, St. Patrick's Day might have been a big deal just a few decades ago, but is less and less important with time. So, many people in modern times don't even know how we got to doing some of our cultural practices in America. Anthropology, the study of human culture, began as a discipline that studied foreign peoples during the European age of exploration. Anthropologists were often responsible for the damage done to those groups, but also documented a lot of their practices and languages. In modern times, anthropologists try to study cultures different from those that they grew up in, because it's easier to see their practices, and because many of these communities are dying out and they wish to document them. We don't see our own practices very easily. These days, people will make jokes on the internet about how Italian people are and Nigerian people are and so forth, and we can kind of see the cultural practices we grew up with and pick them apart in the modern context where some of those things don't apply anymore. Things like asking a girl's father for her hand in marriage, paying a dowry. A lot of stuff has gone by the wayside in modern times. So it's much easier to see antiquated practices. But what of the practices that we are taking on right now? Things like answering work emails at all hours, always keeping our work phones on us, working longer and harder for less pay, not getting a Christmas bonus. In fact, not getting a Christmas bonus was such an egregious thing in the past that it was basically the entire plot of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. But now, it's just commonplace. And there are even more business-minded practices that are showing up in our lives, like treating basic needs of intimacy and connection as business transactions, not just the rise of OnlyFans, but even the concept of one-night stands, or measuring and quantifying every aspect and facet of our health in watches and analyzing the data, calculating macros and obsessively eating proteins. We treat ourselves like products, ones that must be perfected so that we can sell ourselves to the best jobs possible, understanding and improving ourselves only for financial purposes. Children are not for loving and nurturing, but for preserving our legacy. They are financial investments for many people, which is why I think parents can become so obsessed with making sure their children get into the best schools and get on the best tracks as early as possible. Culture is many things in our world. Our socially expected waking and sleeping hours, the food we eat, the people we spend time with, our romantic relationships, and how we earn money and what we do with it. And now everything is about business. Life is not for living, it's a hustle. And as a result of these policies, we have to work harder than ever before just to scrape by. And because wealthy people drive the economy and culture, they expect everyone else to conform to it. They make hustling seem cool and desirable. In this hustle, we are number one. This isn't just American individualism. It's a whole other thing. Because to simply survive in it, we must become completely selfish, greedy, and base instinct-minded, like animals in the jungle. But it's really awesome because we're hustling. We're doing whatever we have to do, and that is seen as being really amazing. Like somehow being in touch with the animal that lives in every human is now the highest pursuit of human existence. It encourages individualism and apathy to a dangerous place, which is why we can't talk to each other anymore. It's not about differing beliefs. It's the fact that only our ideas matter, no one else's. We are so wrapped up in our egos and our identity, we can't see the forest for the trees. Everyone everyone is your enemy for housing, food, and so on, which is why immigrants of all stripes are now unwelcome. Of course, wealthy people love this because we'll never organize or fight against them as a result. There are few languages to discuss anything beyond work. I remember this scene from Sleepless in Seattle in which Tom Hanks, the main widower of the movie, discusses his issues. He's just lost his wife, the love of his life, and he's left with their child, raising him alone. All his coworker can do is hand him a business card from another shrink. No one knows how to talk to him, how to be there for him in a meaningful way. We cannot grieve or feel deep feelings in this work-oriented culture. Feelings are just obstacles that we must get over so we can get back to work. To wallow is to be a victim, and there is no victimhood allowed in this world. Everything that happens in your life is your responsibility, except because everyone is only responsible for themselves, they are not responsible to anyone else. You cannot hold someone responsible for being abusive. That's their choice, and you don't have much recourse in how to respond. People in abusive or difficult households are a great example. Police can only intervene when something goes wrong. There is no safety net to protect them. The cycle of violence continues unchecked, because if we are all only responsible for ourselves, if we have no morality, as business encourages us not to, then it's a pretty messed up world we create. If there is no accountability, then there is no punishment and no change. People like Trump can just decide to do strange things like blow up the Iran nuclear agreement and set a course for the current crisis in the Middle East, or basically put the Taliban back in power, embolden Russia, or do any of the other crazy things he's been doing in his second term. But it's all okay, because he's just doing what he has to do for his own survival and that of his people, the rich. Actions have no consequences in our world, especially if you're wealthy. We are disconnected from pleasure as well. The joy of biting into a juicy piece of fruit, of looking up at the clouds on a lazy afternoon. There are no roses to stop and smell. Our goods are less and less quality, not just because they're not made in America, but because squeezing us for every dime is more important than producing decent goods. Goods are everywhere and more important than us, so we see everything as commodities of some variety. We use people and are used by others. Life is meaningless and irrelevant. And if ever I should feel bad for even a moment, I am reminded that the world is a fundamentally unfair place. Not because we make it that way, but because of some unknown, mystical, spiritual force that no one can fathom. The economy. It's strange and frustrating that so many struggles boil down to money these days, but that's the world we live in. And the result of it is that we have no value as human beings, only as consumers and workers producing wealth for others. And more than that, because we are valueless, we are powerless. So we don't feel that we're allowed to ask more from our leaders, our politicians, our doctors, and anyone else in a position above us. So the doctor doesn't want to cure us. He just wants to run tests and then give us whatever is available from the pharmaceutical industry. Politicians cannot do anything to improve our communities. If they try, they are labeled communist, or they simply remain a part of the system, happy to line their own pockets. Our leaders are just like us, looking out for number one. We are all alone, fighting for survival in a kind of jungle where the most ruthless, animalistic people win. We are free to be selfish, alone, emotionally disconnected, and disturbed until one day we snap. The lack of healthcare, living wages, normal food, the lack of pretty much every basic human need has killed us all a little bit on the inside. In my opinion, the rise of the mass shooter events, of seemingly arbitrary violence in American society, is rooted in this complete lack. When you have nothing to lose, your life and those of others are utterly meaningless, even to you. Your point, your hatred and anger, whatever it is that drives you to that place, is more important than your life. And the proliferation of guns across the nation, rather than community centers, mental health facilities, walking tracks, community gardens, all the things that would help us to process difficult feelings, find help in community, none of those things are as important as guns. The proliferation of this horror is the breakdown of our world, and is also the direct result of war also becoming a business. War is not just a fact of human civilization anymore. It's not a series of atrocities to be avoided by the sacrifice of good men. There is no honor in war anymore. In the age of supply-side economics, war is part of business. We don't talk much about Veterans Day in the US anymore, mostly because it's a public joke that veterans are treated like garbage in America now, and it's disgusting. There was a great episode of Hey Arnold, the fun-loving, football-headed kid from the 90s, wherein his grandfather, a World War II veteran, drives him to the Capitol on Veterans Day to show him how important it is to honor veterans, whether they fought in a big way like his grandfather or in a small way like like his best friend's dad, because their sacrifices were to create peace. But post-World War II, war is now big business, and business is all that matters. Peace has no place in the world. Diplomacy and engagement with our enemies is wrong, because we must keep the economy alive. And you could say, well, that's just capitalism. But capitalism is a system that has been around for a long time, and war wasn't always like this. War in its current state is a product of supply-side economics. It's a culture that determines everything around us, feels the unhappiness of our lives, and keeps itself alive as it does. Being individual consumers, not members of a community, should give us rights, but it just pulls us apart from each other. Men don't trust women, and women don't trust men. And how could they? Everything is about buying and selling things, even people. How do you build the fabric of a society like that? If, as most Americans believe, the fabric of a society is born out of marriage and children, it's not just a belief, though. Laws are geared in that direction as well. People act like those who choose not to have children are selfish, but this mistrust, as well as a lack of resources, the community that is necessary to have kids, just isn't there. We cannot trust our neighbors, or even our friends on a deeper level, because to be competing like animals for jobs or money, we cannot be close to each other. How can a woman trust a man then? And if there is no trust in the relationship, then how can there be a relationship, let alone children? Subjecting children to a specific future as slaves, to the supervillain parodies quaintly known as billionaires, well, it just feels cruel, which is why more and more people are choosing not to have children. Given my age, I have only ever known supply-side economics, so it's extremely difficult for me to imagine a world where my self-worth and existence isn't determined by the goods and money around me or in my possession. I have only ever known a world wherein shopping is a hobby, material goods mean happiness, and poverty and homelessness are in the growing norm of a supposedly wealthy nation. There is no sense here that this is a nation where we care for one another. Even before I understood what supply-side economics was, growing up watching George W., I knew his strange obsession with business and the wealthy wasn't going to end well. I remember when I got a little bit older watching this scene from the hit series The Golden Girls, wherein 4 older women living out their golden years in Miami in the 80s and 90s are forced to make a difficult financial decision, profiting off of the potential death of an artist in order to make enough money to buy a new roof. It's the only way they can think of, but they find it an immoral prospect and don't necessarily want to do it. In the end, they agree they have no choice, and it leads to this great scene.
All right, we're all in.
Fine. Welcome to the George Bush era. Me.
And most people I met in America became more and more that way as I grew up. This isn't to say that decency doesn't exist. It's just not culturally normal anymore. You have to get yours before he gets his. Or as Helga from Hey Arnold might put it,
"Come off your high horse, sister. Christmas is about presents, getting yours before the other guy gets his."
Ironically though, in both episodes of these shows, these characters, Sophia and Helga respectively, do the right thing. Whether it's Sophia giving her rare blood type to the artist to save his life, or Helga giving up her Christmas gift to give Arnold his. They sacrifice their own happiness and security to do the right thing, which is why sometimes I think that the 90s might be the last gasp of decency in America. I love to go back and watch old sitcoms when I have the chance, and I've noticed that with each passing year, sitcoms become less and less about how to reform ordinary people from selfishness or moral decay, and more about how ordinary people are surviving in difficult situations. It was like going from Boy Meets World to The King of Queens. One was all about helping a boy grow up and be a good, moral, and decent person. And The King of Queens started out that way as well, a working class couple living in Queens, trying to be good, decent people while dealing with the difficulties of working class life, living paycheck to paycheck. But by the end of it, they just didn't care anymore and did whatever horrible thing they needed to do to survive. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad, regardless of what you believe in, but I do think there's a logic to what's happening. But people will probably think that listening to this because everything is designed to make people feel bad now. It's not just that capitalism has used that tactic to sell people things for years, but as the world moves forward, leaving humans behind, we all feel bad, all the time, for one reason or another. I used to have terrible anxiety when I was younger, and over years of healing, I came to realize that it was all external, because this cultural practice is wrong. Whether or not there is something that is wrong with us is up for discussion on a case-by-case basis, but this overall feeling that capitalism generates is 100% wrong. Our world is designed to take our natural selves and push it around and mold it for the powerful people of the world. Supply-side economics places those with capital above us. So that bad feeling that they instill in us through crappy food, lack of sleep, overwork, financial stress, it latches onto whatever we see in the news or social media, whether it's an anti-immigrant sentiment or hatred of the rich or some other thing we can't control. It makes us wish destruction upon the world as it is. But deep down, it's a feeling that we're being made to feel that's latching on to something else. Ultimately, we cannot do anything about anything if we cannot see that feeling, that culture, that water that lives around us. We all want things to be easier, to be happier and healthier, to feel connected to our friends and family and neighbors and feel cared for. But the water, the culture around us, the things that we as the little fish can't see, will never allow for that. We must stop blaming ourselves or each other and see that we are all victims of this system that is slowly destroying our world. For the aristocrats, for the billionaires, for those in power who would love to see us all disappear into bondage. I think of people I've met who are good and decent. Just ordinary folks who have families and jobs, go to work every day, and act as small community leaders without even realizing it. They're the kind of people who should be politicians, but they never will be, because in the age of business as God, they are leaders, and politicians are not leaders anymore. They are only power-hungry and morally bankrupt individuals, and those are the only people who gravitate to political positions these days. In this period, we make the choice that only man's darkest instincts have value. In this culture of powerful business, government is the enemy. Regulation is the enemy. If you grease their palms, politicians will give you anything. Legalized corruption like lobbying and gifts, like the Supreme Court receives, are completely normal because goods are more important than morality. So much so that I never knew that a government could do much of anything. Even before the attacks, calling every government action socialist or communist or a welfare state, the implication was that the government couldn't really help you in any way, and that they shouldn't really help you. I grew up in a conservative area, but even moving to a more liberal area later in life, I couldn't see any difference. Councilman Gladhand from Hey Arnold was my understanding of government. Just a series of platitudes, inaction, and nonsense while they created wealth for themselves. Government has been disparaged throughout my life. I can even remember my teacher once suggesting that he had read something about how the Great Depression would have ended sooner without government intervention. He also compared the federal government to our local cable company, saying that if it was difficult to get someone from the cable company on the phone, how could he reach his elected representative? Basically, this argument against quote-unquote big government was the norm when I was growing up. Now, they taught us a certain level of basic civic education, but the actual government was always viewed with a certain level of suspicion, which is why I don't think they ever really taught us how to be active civically. I could remember watching a Rage Against the Machine music video, which basically claimed that Bush and Gore were the same. Of course, being a child, I didn't understand that. They were two different parties, but I get it now, because the Democratic Party moved right in the 90s, seeing the success of Reagan, and basically became a crappier version of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party went bananas with business. Politicians, business-minded people, those who grew up through the advent of supply-side economics but spent their youth blessed by liberal tax policies, are often the ones who bought into these ideas wholeheartedly. Boomers look at places like East Germany in the 80s and see a failed utopia not worth trying for, a naive and foolish dream. Because, as we know, Germany was reunited after its collapse. Anyone who helps others is an idiot, because the ego is all that matters. It's every man for himself, as they say. Really, it's just a justification for toxic behavior. And they shape the culture, pushing everyone else in the same direction, because evil is man's nature, nothing else. Boomers, and now later on, conservatives of every stripe, think that trans people are just faking it to be able to win some privilege. Everyone is just selfish and out for themselves. Oppression is just currency. They can't fathom that good people could exist in the world unless they fit in their image of what a good person is. They use Christianity to justify it too, forgetting that every religion, regardless of what it says about man's nature, pushes us to be better in the face of everything. If you are kind and want to help others, then you are nothing but a fool. And when no one helps anyone, when the decay of the world becomes common, then they sit and point and say, yes, this is how it is and always will be. But secretly they love it because it's a free license to be lazy, selfish, and simple-minded. It speaks of how this culture is reinforced, because if people like AOC or other members of the squad who are trying to be leaders rather other than just politicians ever get power, then their very worldview collapses. How can they not take lobbyist money? They must be corrupt. This whole culture would change, as cultures do and should, and their dominance would end. Because as I said before, culture informs economics and politics. Russia has been an autocracy for decades, so it's no surprise that they would go back to that every chance they get. The US has been a democracy since its inception as a nation state. So if democracy was to inform capitalism, then it would be all about taxation with representation. The idea that if fairness, justice, equality, and truth are more important than anything else, then the government and people have a duty to build a fair society, one where our tax dollars go towards us. We decide how good and fair the world is, no matter how powerless we feel. There are other places in the world that make goods quality and life fair and equal. They don't fear social safety nets as communists, so it is 100% possible. If you don't believe me, believe in the most incredible lemon sugar cake drink that I had in Japan years ago. I hate Starbucks drinks. I have never liked sugary, syrupy coffees. I can't even drink coffee. But this changed my life at how incredible it was, and from the same company that is utterly insufferable in America. Reading through letters from an American over the last year has truly been an eye-opening experience. The idea that someone like Lena Khan could exist at all is amazing to me, because I remember the net neutrality fiasco. In many of her letters from last year, Heather Cox Richardson weaves a tale of government functionality, from explaining the click-to-cancel rule that the FTC implemented, which required sellers to make it as easy to cancel a subscription to a service as it is to sign up for one, to highlighting economic growth, the fall of inflation, to the power of the Infrastructure Act. Biden's government was probably as close as I've ever come to a government that the older folks in my town would have known. I think it was best articulated in the season 3 opening episode of Abbott Elementary, in which people from the district actually come to the school and introduce themselves to the teachers. Historically, the district has been apathetic, disconnected, and generally uncaring. But even the most cynical teachers are impressed by this new crop of district workers, how innovative and caring they are. And while they only affect so much change, the new people really only started at the beginning of the 2023 school year. In this case, art imitates life, showing us how the Biden administration differed from previous administration. Of course, this season, things are going back to the same situation as before, but it showed us what was possible. The short version being, if it exists somewhere else, it could exist everywhere with the right support and infrastructure, aka the culture that defines how our systems run. But really, what is the solution then? The antidote to obsessive individualism is a sense of joyful duty to the world and a sense of humanity's potential goodness. I think of how I've loved old movies all my life, but the ones from the 1930s and 1940s really hit differently these days. The people of those times lived through horrors incomprehensible to us, but it galvanized them to action to build a better world for future generations. They never gave in to the ugly nature of reality, because in the horrors of scrounging for food during the Depression or fighting in World War II, they knew the importance of putting their personal happiness away for the greater good. So many films of this time really highlight the importance of that. They had a sense of duty and sacrifice, but not always in an austere or punishing manner. They gave willingly to the future and joyfully. It's funny, they saw ugliness in the world that we have never known, even in the difficulties of the 21st century. But they never gave up or began to believe that humanity was somehow evil. They gave through love and positivity, knowing that their sacrifices were worth something. I think of a film I watched recently called The Rains Came, in which a spoiled young woman falls in love with the town physician while in colonized India, and when the monsoon hits, nearly wiping out the town she's staying in, she gives up her selfish ways and steps up to volunteer. She dies helping to stem a cholera epidemic, but she gives up the physician willingly beforehand, allowing him to become the next leader of the region, because the well-being and survival of those people was more important than even her life. I think of people like Warren Buffett, who are problematic in their own ways, but different from most rich people in modern times. He was born before the advent of supply-side economic culture, so he's just happy living his modest life. He doesn't need lavish things or to own the world. I wonder what life would have been like when morals, decency, and humanity were more important than money. Buffett Buffett isn't discount Lex Luthor or mentally ill Tony Stark. He is just a man, and even he thinks we've gone too far in the pursuit of money. Take, for example, his recent open letter on the subject. Even George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life, one of the more popular films from this time period, lived this way, constantly putting the happiness of others over his own. He doesn't regret this choice until he has a rotten day that nearly makes him throw away everything precious. The most poignant moment of the film is obviously the one in which George decides to live. Up to that point, George was ready to throw away his life because he didn't know what it was worth. And that was the point that Clarence the Angel was making. This is the inherent potential goodness of humanity. We don't know what value we bring to the table because no matter how much we analyze our existence, we can never truly know what impact we have had on the world. Humanity needs dignity. Only we can give it to each other. And right now, we have none. Because we don't live in George's world. In some ways, ours is the alternative world that George Bailey sees when he wishes he'd never been born. He sees how his rival, Potter, would have run the town, and it is a deeply undignified place. Watching the main street filled with stripteases, casinos, and other hedonistic activities, I can't help but think of the proliferation of pornography, legalized gambling apps, poisoned artificial foods, drugs both legal and illegal, all creating a world where people are slaves to those just like Potter. The scene with the character Violet Bick is particularly moving, because single women struggle to have options even in George Bailey's world, and in Potter's world, she's being carted away to jail. Potter's world is one devoid of the dignity that the Bailey family tried to preserve for ordinary people, including the marginalized. It's a harrowing portrait of a world without social responsibility, morality, or decency. If people like Potter decide human life is meaningless in the face of money, then humanity has no right to exist at all. In the world of fiduciary responsibility, we are all worth more dead than alive, because we are nothing more than slaves to the almighty dollar. But if we try to give one another dignity, we give each other a chance at having value, of lifting the human condition up and improving the project of human existence. We build a world we can be proud of, one that cares for the marginalized, one that prioritizes family and community, one that fills our emotional needs and gives us hope for the future, for children, for laughter and joy. It's an emotional argument, but to be human is to be emotional. Life is a sensory thing. Of course, if we're not careful, we'll end up with the fake alternate ending to It's a Wonderful Life that SNL made in the 90s, wherein the whole town just beats the crap out of Potter. We're headed down that path right now if Luigi's actions are any indication. But the Greatest Generation would never do this. The entirety of that generation, as I understood them in my youth, was focused on duty, morality, and decency. But in modern times, it's a burden. As the world gets more and more selfish, duty and morality are dangerous concepts, one that place an inordinate amount of responsibility on some people over others. Because duty is not one of a cultural movement, but rather one of individual responsibility, just like everything in the world today. These boycotts that we're seeing on TikTok and throughout social media are an attempt to try and rebuild that sense of communal duty, because alone we can accomplish nothing. No amount of reducing single people's carbon footprint or giving to charity or being anti-capitalist will fix the larger systemic issues. Being duty-minded as part of a community and thinking of how our actions will affect our grandchildren, even if we're not having children, is the key. Business is callous, cold, and empty. So to solve this, we must be kind to ourselves and others, give where we can, and nurture ourselves where we need to. It's as simple as being moral and selfless whenever possible. Right now, we accept selfishness as the only nature of life, but it's not. Everyday people do heroic things, save people's lives, and talk about how good it is to help others. We all crave that feeling of being there for someone. The joy, the satisfaction of giving is just not something the media depicts in any way anymore. Depending on the context, some people will label it socialism or communism, but it is our most fundamental feeling. The need to love and be loved, to care for others. It's where we find meaning, and we don't even know that's what we're missing. People need to be reminded of this fact, but instead, we get things like the scene from Interstellar where Matt Damon is talking about how humans are inherently selfish.
You never would have come here unless you believed you were going to save them. Evolution has yet to transcend that simple barrier. We can care deeply, selflessly, about those we know, but that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight.
how can we say what people would have done? Because just a few generations ago, our ancestors went to war to save the world from a dictator with designs for a global empire and won. They weren't encouraged to be selfish, they were encouraged to be selfless, to put themselves last and others first. They had that sense of meaning that we are all searching for in this modern hedonism. I remember the "my masks protect you and your masks protect me" slogan that was popularized during COVID. The vehement way that many people resisted them as an affront to their personal freedom was insane, but ultimately it's what they were told to do. Imagine if during the London air raid, people just refused to black out their windows, not caring if they got bombed, and took their neighbor out with them. We even had air raid drills in America, and people complied. According to It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey was an air raid warden because he couldn't go and fight. People back then did it because they were told that they could. Everyone from local citizens to Hollywood actors took up the cause of the war, doing what they could to ensure the survival of humanity. If you don't believe me, just go look at Humphrey Bogart's IMDb page, because there are so many World War II propaganda films, it's absurd. And it wasn't just because a certain part of the population felt that the war would help the economy. People in Russia, Europe, Asia, all over the world felt a sense of duty to the future. And even after the war and the liberation of colonized nations, people felt a sense of pride and duty to the future of their nations, falling into the roles that were necessary to help build things rather than pursuing their dreams. Enough with the self-flagellating conversations about how much humans suck and how we don't deserve to be here. It's boring and pointless. We're here, and we're going to be here for a long time. We can be remembered as assholes by our descendants, or as those who stepped up. It's as simple as changing our perspective on ourselves by changing our perspective on humanity. If we can believe that we are good, center basic morality in our lives, if we can look to history and see how other people who weren't that different from us did it, then we can try to live up to who we know we can be. What is so different between us and them? We hurt ourselves in believing that we are selfish and reinforcing that idea. If we are selfish, then we are cowardly, and in some cases, just outright evil. And if the rest of us are cowardly, then there is no one to stand up to those who are evil. We don't ask ourselves to step up where we can, and we stay stuck in that vicious cycle. But truly, if our ancestors did it, then we can too. And perhaps we can come from a place of kindness towards ourselves and others. Don't demand action the way that business does, forcing productivity, but rather give where you can and as much as you can, like community asks. Because we are at just as much of a crisis point, the same kind of crisis that drove our ancestors to action. We have a duty right now, twofold actually, to restore human dignity and to change our post-World War II order to a green order, one that prioritizes our health as well as the Earth's. Not just to deal with climate change, but to make a world that is more balanced. I truly believe that life is a spiral. We keep facing the same things in our lives until we change and break out of the pattern and do things differently. And that may be true for the human race as well. So it stands to reason that we should look to them. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this, maybe go check out my video on Mad Men. And if not, I have plenty of other hopefully evergreen videos for you to choose from. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!